So this section is going to be on the hydraulic press and how to push a bearing off of a shaft. So we're going to use this one as an example. I'm going to talk about the book real quick first. Hydraulic presses come in vertical or horizontal. Horizontals are usually the porta powers that we talked about in the core book. I believe it was Power Tools, Introduction to Power Tools in that section. So that's a ram that goes horizontal. This one is going to be a vertical press. So it talks about shop sizes from 5 to 60 tons. I believe this one is a 10 ton, but I don't remember, and it doesn't have the markings on it anymore. Important parts are going to be obviously the cylinder, the pressure gauge. These springs are what's going to return it back up here. And here's going to be the pump over here. Ours is a manual pump that you pump back and forth. They do make electric pumps out there where you turn them on with a switch and things like that. But those are usually on the bigger shop ones. So it produces a great amount of force. So a lot of times insurance reasons will mandate that you have a cage around it so if things do go bad, they don't blow up and hit you. Ours has a chain over here on the side with a bolt. And of course I dropped it. You pick the bolt out, put the chain on, and stick the bolt through. There's no nut on it, so it comes apart. You can also put this lock down here on the bottom to help it. I'm going to open it back up for now, but that's why there are cages around. To prevent damage to parts or personal injury, follow the recommended precautions. Remove all burrs. What they're talking about, and I'm going to use this one as an example. Any obstructions here on the shaft. We're going to push this bearing off that way, so we're going to look at this side to make sure there's nothing in there. After this shaft here, this is all smaller, so it doesn't matter. Ensure that the workpiece is properly supported. We are going to do that on this by making sure these blocks are here. We use the big blocks, then we can use either the smaller ones here or the ones down on the ground down there to get it as close as we can because we want to push on the inner race of the bearing. But these red ones do not fit on there by themselves very well. They were from our old press, and as you see, there's only about a 1/4 of an inch on each side there, so we always use the bigger blocks, either this 10-inch wide one or the ones down there under the red blocks. Okay, next we're going to use a lubricant between mating parts to prevent seizing. Have a little PB blaster. We'll spray it on the inside of the bearing or on the shaft there to help it move, because we're going to be pushing this bearing up this way, or the bearing's going to stay there. We're going to be pushing the shaft down through. Next caution they give is monitor the pressure gauge to ensure that you do not apply excessive pressure. Here's our pressure gauge. We're going to be watching through the screen as we are pumping. When we first start and there's no pressure against anything, we're not going to build any pressure. The only time we start building pressure is when we get resistance against it. So don't panic when there's no pressure when you first start. Place a piece of brass or other material that is softer than the workpiece between the ram and the workpiece to prevent marring the surface. I'm going to use a block of wood when we get up there. Okay? And what they're talking about there would be these threaded ends of a pump shaft. That's where the impeller spins on. We don't want to damage those threads. It would be just like damaging the threads of a bolt and then having to redo them. So we will be putting this on top of there so we don't mar up the threads or damage the threads. And then watch the parts closely, be sure they're aligned correctly. When we get it in there, we are going to try and push, and I hope you guys can see this, on the inner race here. This part right down here is the inner race of the bearing. That is the interference fit that we are trying to remove off of there. None of this matters out here, but we want to push against there and leave the shaft stationary. So that's what I've set up down there. And the last thing they mention is putting a catch box down in there. Well, we don't have necessarily a box, but we've taken an old piece of conveyor belt, so when this shaft comes through and falls out and the bearing stays up here, it doesn't hit the concrete or the metal down there at the bottom and damage the shaft. So with that, we're going to be ready to start removing the shaft out of there. The first thing we're going to have to do, this is too low. We don't have enough throw or length with that. So we're going to move this up to these holes. You see there's 2 pins here that lock it in place. I've preset it so that the pins will pull out. Normally you just have to turn this crank and lift the weight off of it to get the pins out. Then we're going to crank this up until we line up the next bolt holes. We're getting close. Check both sides. Sometimes it doesn't move exactly evenly. That was partial of the way in. We still got to come up a little bit more. Oh. We're going to have to come back down because our shaft was hitting there. So what we're going to have to do to get our height correct, we're going to have to take those bigger blocks out, put the smaller ones in to get our height. A little bit too high on that side. There's that one in. We'll come over to this side. And there's that one in. Now we have both pins back in, and we'll be able to loosen that up. We don't loosen it all the way, we just keep a slight tension on the cable over here, and then we'll be there. Now, what has changed for us is we wouldn't have the ability to get this in there. When we pull this piece out, this shaft is already damaged. Let me turn it this way. See how it's already cut? So in this application, we're not going to damage it anymore by pushing against that. So we're going to go ahead and push without the block of wood. Now, if we were pushing against something like this shaft, where the impeller has to screw back on there, we would either have to find something thinner to put in there, or change around our block arrangement. Last step we need to go through is the pump itself. I'll come on the outside. The pump has a latch that locks it first. And that is this right here. Make sure that is undone. This is the release and set valve. Turn it to counterclockwise to release the pressure, and then the springs would take over and retract the cylinder. Tighten it this way, and we're ready to start moving the press. As I pump this, you guys can see how it goes. It only goes there right there. Then it goes back to the pump. We had somebody break this handle off a couple of years ago trying to pull down. So now we're going to make sure that our cylinder is pushing squarely against the shaft. So we get it close like that. We come back over here. And yes, it is going to push right on the center of the shaft. It may be hard to see here. And now we put our safety precautions in place. We close the gate. Again, in case something bad happens, I'll set the lock down here. And then we would watch the pressure gauge, which you may or may not be able to see in the video as we start pushing it. You can feel the resistance by running the hand. See how easy that comes out of there. We hardly built any pressure. Because this has been on and off so many times, it comes off easily. Plus we put penetrating oil on there. So as you guys do this, you may or may not need the penetrating oil. But at this point now, we have completed the process. We have separated the bearing from the shaft. Next, one of the next videos will be heating the bearing back up and putting it back on the shaft. So there's this one. If you have any questions, contact me, email, text, call, whatever. Thanks.